In 1977, one actor did something on live television that was supposed to be thrilling. Instead, it became so controversial that network executives scrambled to fix what they'd created. The scene lasted only seconds. But those seconds changed television forever. And it started a chain reaction that nobody in Hollywood expected. The show wouldn't survive what came next. By 1977, Happy Days wasn't just a television show. It was a cultural force. Every Tuesday night, millions of families gathered around their screens to watch Richie Cunningham and his friends navigate life in 1950s Milwaukee. The show had launched in 1974 and quickly became one of the most watched programs in America. Kids wore leather jackets like the Fonz. Teenagers used his catchphrase, "I," on playgrounds across the country. Parents loved it because it was wholesome. Networks loved it because it made money. But there was a problem nobody wanted to admit. By the 7th season, the show's creators were running out of ideas. The writers had exhausted the typical teenage storylines. Boy meets girl. Friend drama. School dances. Parent conflicts. They'd done it all. The ratings were still strong, but everyone in the industry knew the truth. A hit show's shelf life has limits. The question wasn't if Happy Days would eventually fade. The question was when. Then someone had an idea that seemed brilliant at the time. What if they did something nobody had ever seen on television before? What if they pushed the boundaries? What if they created a moment so memorable that it would remind viewers why they loved this show in the first place? The Fonz, played by Henry Winkler, was already the show's biggest star. He was cool, confident, and seemed capable of doing anything. So the writers decided to give him the ultimate stunt. They would have the Fonz jump over a shark on water skis. Nobody knew that this single decision would become one of the most infamous moments in television history. Nobody realized that this jump would spawn a phrase that television critics would use for decades. Nobody understood that this scene would become the symbol of a show that had officially lost its way. The stunt was scheduled for the 5th episode of Season 5, titled Fonzie's Waterski Jump. But what happened next changed everything. The episode was filmed in the summer of 1977, but it wouldn't air until September 20th of that year. The production team treated it like a major event. This wasn't just another scene. This was the moment that would define the entire season. Henry Winkler, who played the Fonz, actually performed a version of the stunt himself, though safety concerns meant that a stunt double did the most dangerous parts. The shark was real. The water was real. The tension on set was real. The writers believed they were doing something revolutionary. Television had always been cautious. Networks had standards and practices departments that scrutinized every word, every gesture, every potential controversy. But by 1977, those rules were loosening. Shows were pushing boundaries in ways they never had before. So why couldn't Happy Days push a boundary too? Why couldn't they create a moment so outlandish that it would become instantly legendary? The logic made sense at the time. Here's what the creators didn't understand. Happy Days worked because it felt real. The show's strength came from relatable moments. Richie struggling with his first heartbreak. The Fonz pretending to be tough while secretly being vulnerable. These moments connected with audiences because they felt authentic. They felt possible. A teenager jumping over a shark on water skis didn't feel like Happy Days anymore. It felt like something else entirely. But the network executives loved the idea. ABC saw dollar signs. They envisioned massive ratings. They imagined water cooler conversations across America. They thought about the publicity. They thought about the headlines. What they didn't think about was whether the stunt fit the show's actual identity. What they didn't consider was whether audiences would see this as creative or desperate. What they didn't predict was the exact moment when viewers would decide that Happy Days had finally jumped the shark. The phrase didn't exist yet, but it was about to. The episode was finished. It was edited. It was locked. There was no turning back. On September 20th, 1977, millions of viewers sat down to watch what would become the most talked about moment in the show's entire run. Some were excited. Some were skeptical. Nobody was prepared for what this moment would mean for television's future. The stunt was about to air. And America was about to respond in ways the network never anticipated. The episode aired on a Tuesday night, just like every other episode of Happy Days. But this Tuesday was different. As the Fonz prepared for his water ski jump, tension built. The scene was shot like an action sequence. Music swelled. The camera cut between the Fonz's determined face and the shark circling below. Then it happened. He jumped. He cleared the shark. The crowd cheered. And then the episode continued like nothing remarkable had occurred. But something remarkable had occurred. Within hours, the phone lines at ABC lit up. Viewers called to complain. Critics rushed to their typewriters. Newspapers picked up the story. Television magazines ran headlines. The stunt didn't feel like Happy Days anymore. It felt like desperation dressed up as entertainment. It felt like the show's creators had abandoned what made the program special in the first place. Parents who had watched the show with their children suddenly felt uncomfortable. Was this the kind of content they wanted their families watching? The reaction was immediate and harsh. What made the backlash even more intense was the timing. This wasn't happening in a vacuum. By 1977, American television was already changing. Shows were getting darker, edgier, more willing to tackle serious subjects. But Happy Days was supposed to be different. It was supposed to be the safe choice. It was supposed to be the show you could watch with your grandmother. The shark jump felt like a betrayal of that promise. Television critics became particularly brutal. They called it a stunt. They called it a cry for help. They said it proved the show had run out of ideas. Some critics predicted it would be remembered as the moment when Happy Days stopped being a quality program and became just another show trying anything to maintain ratings. The cultural conversation shifted almost overnight. What was supposed to be a thrilling moment became a symbol of something going wrong. But here's the thing that the network didn't anticipate. The phrase, jumping the shark, didn't become common immediately. It would take years for that specific language to enter the cultural vocabulary. But the feeling was instant. Audiences understood, on some level, that they had just witnessed a turning point. They had just seen a show cross a line from which it might not return. The trust between the show and its viewers had been damaged. And trust, once broken, is almost impossible to repair. The fans had jumped the shark. And nobody could undo it. ABC executives watched the reaction unfold with growing panic. They had expected praise. They had imagined water cooler moments where people said, "Did you see that? That was amazing." Instead, they got criticism. They got concern. They got the sense that they had miscalculated something fundamental about their audience. The network's response was telling. Rather than defend the stunt, they distanced themselves from it. They didn't promote it as a bold creative choice. They didn't celebrate it as groundbreaking television. Instead, they quietly moved forward, hoping that viewers would forget about the shark jump and return to enjoying the show. But you can't unring a bell. You can't unsee something that's been broadcast into millions of homes. Ratings initially held strong, which confused everyone. Happy Days remained popular. Families still tuned in. The show didn't collapse overnight. But something had shifted in the viewer's mind. There was a new awareness that the show might not be invincible. There was a new understanding that creative decisions could backfire. There was a new question hanging over every episode: what would the show do next to keep people watching? This question would haunt Happy Days for the rest of its run. The show continued for 6 more seasons after the shark jump. 6 more years of episodes. 6 more years of storylines. But the cultural perception had changed. Critics now watched the show differently. They looked for signs of desperation. They looked for moments where the show was trying too hard. They looked for evidence that Happy Days was no longer the confident, clever program it had once been. The show's creators tried to recover. They went back to the basics. They focused on the relationships between characters. They developed more complex storylines. They brought in new cast members to refresh the show's energy. Some episodes were genuinely good. Some storylines were creative and touching. But none of it mattered as much as that one moment in 1977. The shark jump had become the defining symbol of the show's decline, whether that decline was real or imagined. What made this particularly cruel was that it wasn't entirely fair. Happy Days didn't actually jump the shark because the show was bad. It jumped the shark because its creators made one specific creative choice that didn't fit the show's identity. The show still had good writers. It still had talented actors. It still had stories worth telling. But perception is everything in television. And the perception had shifted from, "This is a great show," to, "This is a show that's trying too hard." The network couldn't fix what had been broken. Happy Days officially ended on September 24, 1984. The final episode aired 7 years after the shark jump. But everyone in the industry knew the real ending had come much earlier. The show's decline wasn't sudden. It was gradual. It was like watching a once brilliant light slowly dim until finally, it went out completely. The numbers told the story. In its first season, Happy Days averaged 30 million viewers per episode. By season 11, that number had dropped to around 15 million. The show was still successful by most standards. It was still making money. It was still generating cultural conversations. But it was no longer the phenomenon it had been. It was no longer the show that defined Tuesday nights. It was no longer the program that everyone had to watch. Some television historians argue that the shark jump didn't actually kill Happy Days. They say the show was already showing signs of fatigue. They point out that no television show lasts forever. They argue that Happy Days probably would have ended within a few years regardless of the stunt. There's probably some truth to that argument. Shows do age. Audiences do move on. Cultural tastes do shift. But here's what's undeniable. The shark jump became a permanent symbol of the show's decline. Even if Happy Days would have eventually faded anyway, the shark jump accelerated that process. It damaged the show's reputation. It gave critics a specific moment to point to when they discussed why the show had lost its way. It created a narrative about creative desperation that overshadowed everything that came after. And that narrative changed television forever. After Happy Days jumped the shark, networks became more cautious about stunts. Executives thought twice before suggesting outlandish plotlines. The phrase, jumping the shark, entered the cultural vocabulary as a warning sign. It became the thing you said about a show when you noticed it was trying too hard to stay relevant. It became the symbol of the moment when a show stopped being authentic and started being cynical. Henry Winkler's character had meant to soar. Instead, the Fonz's water ski jump became the most famous failure in television history. It became the moment that everyone remembered, even people who had never watched the show. It became the reference point for discussing television decline. It became the perfect example of how one creative choice can overshadow years of work. The shark was supposed to be thrilling. Instead, it became a ghost that haunted the show until the very end. Decades have passed since that September night in 1977. Happy Days is now a historical artifact. It's shown in reruns. It's discussed in television studies classes. It's referenced in documentaries about pop culture. But the shark jump remains the first thing people remember about the show's later years. It's the thing that defines the show's legacy in a way that no other moment does. The phrase, jumping the shark, became official language. Television critics adopted it. Casual viewers used it. It appeared in newspapers and magazines. By the 1990s, it was everywhere. Whenever a show seemed to be losing its way, people would say it had jumped the shark. The phrase became shorthand for creative desperation. It became the way audiences talked about decline. It became the ultimate criticism that a television show could receive, because it implied that the show had abandoned its core identity in pursuit of ratings. But here's what's remarkable. The shark jump wasn't even that outlandish by modern standards. If that same scene aired on television today, it would barely register. We've seen superheroes, science fiction, fantasy, and increasingly absurd stunts become normal television fare. We've seen shows embrace the ridiculous and celebrate it. We've seen audiences reward creative risk-taking. So why did the shark jump feel so wrong in 1977? Because it violated the show's contract with its audience. Happy Days had promised to be grounded. It had promised to be real. It had promised to tell stories about teenagers and their problems in a way that felt authentic. The shark jump broke that promise. It said to viewers, "We're going to do whatever we need to do to keep you watching, even if it means abandoning what made this show special." That violation of trust was what truly damaged the show. This lesson echoed through television history. Decades later, shows learned from Happy Days' mistake. Some shows embraced the absurd from the beginning, so audiences knew what they were getting. Other shows remained grounded and refused to jump the shark, maintaining their integrity even as ratings declined. The smartest shows understood that authenticity was more valuable than any individual stunt. They understood that trust once lost is almost impossible to regain. The Fonz never actually hurt anyone with his water ski jump. But that jump hurt the show in ways that nothing else could have. It became the moment when a beloved program crossed an invisible line. It became the symbol of the end, even though the show continued for years afterward. It became the perfect metaphor for what happens when success makes you forget why people loved you in the first place. Today, when viewers watch Happy Days, many of them know about the shark jump before they ever see it. The moment has become legendary. The moment has become infamous. The moment has become the thing that defines the show's entire legacy. And that's perhaps the cruelest irony of all. The stunt that was meant to save the show became the thing that doomed it. The moment that was supposed to be thrilling became the moment that proved the show had lost its way. One jump changed everything. And television has never been quite the same since. The shark became a symbol. The shark became a warning. The shark became the thing we all remember when we think about what happens when a great show forgets who it was meant to be. Many people watching have probably seen a favorite show decline in ways that made you uncomfortable. If you've ever felt that disappointment when something you loved stopped being what made you love it, you know exactly how audiences felt about Happy Days after that jump. You're not alone in that feeling. The shark is long dead now. The episode is decades old. Henry Winkler has moved on to an incredible career that includes roles people genuinely love and respect. Happy Days is remembered fondly by many, despite the shark jump, or perhaps because of it. The show has become a cultural landmark, a window into what television used to be. But the shark jump remains. It remains as a lesson. It remains as a warning. It remains as the most important moment in the show's entire history, not because it was great, but because it revealed something true about how television works. The real story isn't about a shark. It's about the moment when a show's creators stop trusting their own material. It's about the panic that sets in when success starts to fade and executives feel the pressure to do something, anything, to hold on to what they've built. It's about the difference between evolution and desperation. It's about understanding that the things that make us love something are often the quiet things, the authentic things, the things that feel real. The shark jump was loud. It was big. It was supposed to be unforgettable. But it was unforgettable for the wrong reasons. Television learned from this moment. Shows became more thoughtful about their creative choices. Networks became more careful about pushing boundaries just for the sake of pushing them. Audiences became more aware that they could sense when a show was authentic and when it was grasping. The shark jump became a cultural reference point, a way of talking about decline that transcended Happy Days itself. It became bigger than the show. It became a lesson that echoed through decades of television history. And yet, shows still jump sharks. They do it differently now. Sometimes it's a surprise celebrity guest star. Sometimes it's an absurd plot twist. Sometimes it's a character doing something completely out of character because the writers needed a storyline. The specific form changes, but the impulse remains the same. The impulse to do something drastic. The impulse to chase viewers who are starting to look elsewhere. The impulse to prove that the show still has something to offer, even when deep down, everyone knows that the best days have already passed. The difference is awareness. When a show jumps the shark today, audiences notice immediately. They have language for it. They have a reference point. They can say, there it is, that's the moment, because they learned from Happy Days. They learned that you can feel it when a show stops being true to itself. You can sense it. You can recognize it. And once you recognize it, you can never quite believe in the show the same way again. This is perhaps the most important legacy of that single moment in 1977. It taught us that authenticity matters more than spectacle. It taught us that audiences can sense desperation, even when it's wrapped in expensive production values and exciting action sequences. It taught us that the things we love don't need to prove themselves with stunts. The things we love just need to be themselves. The Fonz didn't need to jump a shark to be cool. Happy Days didn't need a stunt to be good. But in that moment, the show's creators didn't trust that anymore. And that loss of trust was what ultimately changed everything. The shark jump is now part of television history. It's studied in film schools. It's referenced in documentaries. It's used as a teaching tool to explain narrative decline. It's the perfect example of a single creative decision that overshadowed years of good work. But more than that, it's a reminder. It's a reminder that success is fragile. It's a reminder that the things that make us special can disappear if we stop believing in them. It's a reminder that sometimes the smallest moments can have the biggest consequences. One night. One scene. One jump. And everything changed. If you've ever wondered why that moment became so famous, now you know. It wasn't just about a shark. It was about a show losing its way. It was about an audience sensing that loss and responding with disappointment. It was about a single moment becoming a symbol for something much larger. It was about how television works, how culture works, and how the things we love can change in ways we don't expect or want. If you appreciated learning the true story behind this television moment, subscribe because the next video reveals another moment from television history that changed everything, and it's a story most people have never heard. The mysteries and turning points in entertainment history just keep getting more interesting. There's so much more to discover. But this story isn't the only moment that shaped television forever. The next video on this channel reveals something even more surprising about how our favorite shows almost ended before they truly began. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring about the stories behind the stories. Thank you for understanding that television history is real history, filled with real people making real choices that echo through time. The shark may be gone, but its legacy lives on. And now, so does yours, knowing the truth about what really happened that night in 1977.